Last March, I stood in Daniel's back field while he and one of his sons dug up a row of half-gallon jars that had been buried since the previous September. Sauerkraut, pickled beets, dilled beans, and a jar of carrots in a vinegar brine I'd never seen written down anywhere. 6 months underground, and every one of them was still good. Daniel told me his grandfather kept jars in that same ground for over a year and lost almost nothing. The FDA's home preservation guidance, the version most extension offices still hand out, does not acknowledge this method exists. There are reasons for that, and they are not the reasons you would expect. Stick with me to the end, and I will share the one mistake I made my first season that cost me half the jars I buried. Let me name the authority I am pushing back on here, because I am not interested in vague villains. The document I am talking about is the USDA Complete Guide to Home Canning, the 1989 revision, and every revision that has followed it. That guide, and the FDA-aligned home preservation guidance that flows out of it, is what every county extension office in Ohio still hands out when somebody calls in to ask how to put up a quart of green beans. It is a careful document. I have a copy on the shelf in my garage. It is not wrong. It is incomplete. And the thing it is most incomplete about is what people did with their preserved food before electricity ran the country. Here is the testable detail. If you go back into the pre-1947 USDA Farmers Bulletins, the root storage bulletins from the 1920s, 30s, and into the 40s, you will find references to buried container storage. Not detailed protocols, but references. Acknowledgement that the practice existed and worked in certain regions. The 1989 revision narrowed everything. From that point forward, the buried jar method, the root pit, the straw and soil clamp, all of it disappeared from federal home preservation guidance. The guide that replaced them is what your extension agent will read to you over the phone today. I want to be honest with you, I trusted that guide for most of my adult life. Then the power went out for 3 days during an ice storm and we lost a freezer full of food. That was a hard lesson. I started doing the math after that. A chest freezer pulls between $80 and $150 a year in electricity, depending on your rates. It depends on the grid. It fails when the grid fails. And every kilowatt hour I was paying for a function my grandparents got from a hole in the ground. I am not anti-FDA. I taught science for 30 years. I respect what they are trying to do. But the guidance is incomplete, and the people who never accepted it as the final word kept a working method alive. Daniel's family never used the bulletin. They kept doing what worked. So let me show you what works layer by layer, because there is more to it than digging a hole. The first thing to understand is the trench itself. Daniel's trench sits behind the north side of his hay barn. He digs it fresh every September. The barn is not decoration in this sentence. The north side matters, and I will come back to that in a few minutes. The trench runs about 36 to 40 inches deep and roughly 18 inches wide, long enough to hold whatever his wife Rebecca has put up that fall. He shovels out the soil, he sets a 2-inch layer of clean sand at the bottom for drainage, and he wraps each half-gallon mason jar in burlap before he sets it in. Lids sealed, jars inverted. Lid down, base up, every one of them. He fills the trench by October the 1st. He covers the jars with the original soil, mounded slightly so rain runs off, and then he leaves it alone. He does not check on it. He does not dig down to look in January. The whole point is that the trench is undisturbed from the day it is closed until the day it is opened. He digs it out between March the 15th and April the 15th, depending on the year. What I saw last March, when his son and I were pulling jars up out of that ground, was sauerkraut, pickled beets, dilled beans, and a row of jars holding sliced carrots in a brine I did not recognize. 6 months underground, the lids were dry, the seals were tight, the brine was clear. I will get to those carrots in a few minutes. They are the part of this story I had never seen written down anywhere. You will not find any of this in the 1989 guide, not the trench, not the burlap, not the inversion. The method existed when my grandfather was a child, and the federal record of it has been quietly thinning out for 80 years. The second layer is the mechanism. This is where my biology teacher brain went to work, because I needed to know why this method does not poison anyone. The answer is soil temperature. In Holmes County, the native soil is a fertile silt loam over limestone bedrock, down at 36 inches and below. that soil holds between 48 and 54 degrees Fahrenheit year-round, not seasonally, year-round. The summer surface heat does not reach down that far before fall pulls the heat back out, and the winter freeze does not reach down past the frost line. The temperature at 36 inches in February is essentially the same as the temperature at 36 inches in August. That stability is the whole game. Lactofermentation, the process that produces sauerkraut and pickled beets, runs hot and fast at 70 degrees and slows to a near stop below 50. So, when Daniel buries a quart of a half-fermented kraut in October, the cold soil drops the activity to a crawl. The kraut does not over-sour. It does not turn to mush. It holds at the flavor profile it had when it went into the ground, give or take. Vinegar pickles work on a different principle, but the cold helps them too. Vinegar pickles are stable on the shelf because the acidity prevents pathogen growth, but they are not stable in texture. At room temperature, vinegar pickles slowly oxidize and soften. At 50 degrees, that oxidation is barely happening. The carrots and the dilled beans I pulled out of that trench had the texture of carrots and beans put up the week before. And then there is the seal. A canning lid fails when it cycles. Heat, cold, and eventually the rubber compound gives up and you get a hairline break in the vacuum. Buried at 36 inches, the jar does not cycle. The temperature is constant. The seal is not being asked to flex. Daniel told me his grandfather kept jars in that same ground for over a year and lost almost nothing. When you run the soil temperature physics, his grandfather's results are exactly what the math predicts. 14-month sauerkraut, dug up in November the next year, still good. That is not folk memory. That is what the variables produce. No extension bulletin will walk you through that math. The math is not in the bulletin because the bulletin is a national document, and these temperatures are local. The third layer is what you can actually expect from this method because I do not want anyone here burying the wrong thing. What works is anything that is already shelf-stable on its own. Fermented vegetables, sauerkraut, kimchi-style relishes, lacto-fermented beets, fermented carrots and turnips, vinegar pickles of any kind, salt-brined cucumbers, salt-brined green tomatoes. Anything where the chemistry of the brine is already doing the preservation work. The buried jar is not preserving the food. The food is preserving itself. The trench is just a very stable, very dark, very cool storage room. What does not work, and what I do not want anyone trying, is low-acid pressure canned food, green beans pressure canned, corn pressure canned, meat. Any of that needs to be stored where you can monitor it for seal failure. Because if a pressure-canned, low-acid jar loses seal, you have a botulism risk. Same with dairy, same with meat. The buried jar is for high-acid and fermented foods only. That is a hard line, and I want it stated plainly. Within that range, the baseline shelf life is 6 to 12 months. If the trench is undisturbed and the jars are properly inverted at the proper depth, you can push past 12 months. Daniel's grandfather did. I have not personally pushed past 12 months because I dig mine up every spring, but I have no reason to doubt it. My own test, since I do not believe anything until I have run it on my own land, was 12 half-gallon jars buried in the experiment patch in 2022. I will get to what I did wrong in a minute. The jars I buried correctly the second season, every one of them was good when I pulled it. 11 of 12 at 8 months in the first season after I corrected for what I learned. Daniel was not surprised. He told me the method has been doing what it does on that farm for 4 generations. None of this is in the 1989 guide. None of it is in the Extension Office reference binder. The shelf life data is something you can only collect by burying jars and pulling them up, which is what Daniel's family has been doing while the rest of us bought freezers. The fourth layer is the part that surprised me even after I thought I understood the method. And it is where Rebecca comes in. The carrots in that brine I did not recognize were Rebecca's. She gave me the recipe one afternoon in her kitchen while I sat at her table and wrote it in my notebook. I have searched through every USDA bulletin and every extension publication I could find for it. It is not there. 50% raw apple cider vinegar to 50% well water. 2 tablespoons of pickling salt per quart. 3 slices of fresh horseradish root, cut about 1/4 inch thick. 1 teaspoon of yellow mustard seed. 2 dill heads. 2 cloves of garlic smashed flat with the side of a knife. Carrots cut into spears packed into the jar tight enough that they do not float. Brine poured to within half an inch of the rim. Lid sealed, jar inverted. Buried in early October, pulled into March. The horseradish is what I had not seen before. It does something to the texture and to the heat profile of the brine that you do not get from garlic and dill alone. Rebecca told me her mother used it, and her mother's mother used it. I have made it 3 years running now. It is the best vinegar carrot I have ever eaten, and I will say that plainly. The second thing in this layer is the placement. I mentioned the north side of the barn earlier. The reason is that the north side of any large structure stays 4 to 6 degrees cooler in summer because the wall blocks the late-day sun off the soil. In Holmes County, the difference between a 56-degree summer trench and a 50-degree summer trench is the difference between fermentation that creeps and fermentation that crawls. Daniel did not explain it to me in those terms. He just said, north side. When I put a soil thermometer at 36 inches in 3 different spots one August, the north of barn reading was the coldest by a clean 5 degrees. The third thing in this layer is the orientation. I will pay this off fully when I tell you about my first season. For now, just know this. The jars go in lid down. Inverted. Every single one of them. There is a physical reason that is not negotiable, and the bulletin does not mention it because the bulletin does not mention this method at all. If you are finding this useful and you want more of these deep dives into what the Amish know that most modern gardeners have forgotten, I have got more preservation methods coming from Rebecca's kitchen and Daniel's root cellar. The dry salt cabbage crock, the unheated stone root cellar that holds potatoes through April, and vinegar pickling without water bath canning. Subscribe so you don't miss them. Now, about the FDA, about why this method is not in the bulletin your county extension office hands you. I want to be careful here because I am a retired biology teacher, not a conspiracy theorist, and the explanation is not what most people on the internet will tell you. The cutoff document is the USDA Complete Guide to Home Canning, the 1989 revision. That is the version every county extension office in Ohio still works from, with periodic updates that have not changed the core decision. Before 1989, and especially in the USDA Farmers Bulletins of the 1920s through the 1940s on root and produce storage, buried containers were mentioned, not endorsed loudly, but mentioned, acknowledged as a regional practice. After 1989, they were gone, not contradicted. Erased. Here's the reason, and it is not malice and it is not industry pressure. It is standardization liability. When the USDA revised the guide, they narrowed approved methods to the ones that could be lab-validated for botulism risk across every climate zone in the country. Every climate zone, that is the key phrase. A method either works safely in Maine and Arizona and Florida and Minnesota, or it does not get into the guide. Buried jar storage cannot pass that test. It depends on local soil temperature at depth, on drainage, on frost depth, on the microbial population of your particular ground. In Holmes County, my soil at 36 inches sits between 48 and 54 degrees year-round. In Central Florida, the soil at 36 inches sits around 75 to 80 degrees year-round. At 80 degrees, fermentation does not slow. Pathogens can grow. A Florida gardener following a national bulletin that said, "Bury your jars," could get sick, could die. I do not think anyone sat in a room and said, "Let us bury this method." I think they wrote a guide for the average American kitchen, and the method did not fit the average. Same outcome, though. The technique that works perfectly in cool soil regions, the technique that fed Amish families through Ohio winters for 2 centuries, got dropped from the document the rest of us were taught to trust. And I want to be honest, the FDA's caution is not unreasonable. If the agency has to write one document for the entire country, and that document has to be safe for every reader, regardless of where they live, then a method that depends on local conditions is going to get cut. I would probably make the same call if I had that desk job. But the result is still that a working method got buried, and the people who paid the price are the people in cool soil regions who could have used it. The cost lands on you. Every household in this country running a chest freezer 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, is paying somewhere between $80 and $150 a year in electricity to do a job their grandparents got from a hole in the ground. plus the food you lose when the power goes out, plus the dependence on the grid that I learned about the hard way during my ice storm. Daniel's family never read the bulletin. They kept doing what worked. Now the mistake. The one I told you about at the start, October 2022. I had spent 6 months at Daniel's farm, taking notes, asking questions, watching him bury his September jars. I was ready. I packed 12 half-gallon mason jars in my own kitchen, sauerkraut, dilled beans, pickled beets, 2 with vinegar carrots from Rebecca's brine. I dug a trench on the north side of my woodshed. I set the jars in. I covered them up. I went inside, feeling like I had finally crossed over from student to practitioner. I made 2 mistakes I did not know were mistakes. First, I dug the trench 18 inches deep. The Ohio frost line in Holmes County runs about 32 inches in a normal winter, below freezing in February. I had buried my jars in a zone that froze and thawed 3 or 4 times over the course of the winter. Second, I set the jars upright, lid up, the way you would store them on a pantry shelf. In March, I went out to dig them up. 6 of the 12 had broken seals or hairline cracks running up the side of the glass, half my work. Gone. I drove to Daniel's that afternoon with a jar in each hand. He looked at them, asked me how deep, asked me which way up. Then he walked me out to his trench and showed me. Minimum 36 inches in Zone 6A, below frost line, and inverted, lid down, set on a 2-inch bed of sand for drainage. The reason for the inversion is a pressure thing. When the soil shifts and pressure changes around the jar, an inverted jar pushes brine against the seal, an upright jar pulls groundwater past it. The next year I went 38 inches, inverted, on sand, lost 0 jars. Even the gardeners who know this method exists usually get the depth and the orientation wrong, because the depth and the orientation are not written down anywhere a county extension office would point you. I have got more from my Lancaster County visits coming. The same buried jar method is practiced in Pennsylvania's heavier clay soil, plus the regional differences in brine ratios and trench timing I have been documenting. Now you have a method. Most of your neighbors do not. Take a second to tap subscribe. Go ahead, I'll wait, and I will walk you through them. So that is how Daniel's family has stored a year's worth of preserves underground for 4 generations without a single watt of grid power. Now you have the depth, the orientation, and Rebecca's brine. 3 things the bulletin will not give you. Next time, I will show you the dry salt cabbage crock, which does not need a jar at all. Thanks for spending time with me today. I will see you in the next one.